Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Girl, a Guy, and a Buffy podcast. I'm one of your hosts. I'm Charles Swint.
And I'm your other host, Kate Balzer.
We're two friends who've been watching Buffy since the beginning. We are not a rewatch podcast, and we explore big bad themes of the show. So this podcast is full of spoilery goodness, so if you have not watched the entire series and don't want to be spoiled, press pause now. Hey, Kate, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing, Charles?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I'm excited about our episode today, kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of it all, continuing our theme of power and control and consequences. Kate,
Yes.
here's the question for you. So, if we're talking about power, is slaying about the power?
Good question. Yeah. So we're at the core of really what the show is about, since it is called Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
I mean, and Buffy does say it's about power and who
That's
has
true.
it. So, is
Ex
slaying about the power?
yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely a component to it. I think a lot of it also comes down to who the person is. I do think there's commonalities between all of the Slayers, certainly the ones that we see on screen, even the ones that we see for a very short period of time, whether that's the first Slayer or Nikki. But yeah, there's some commonality to the calling, but how they interpret that power, how they deal with that power, any consequences that may come from it differs, I think, based on who they are and how they were raised and their personality. How about you?
I think there's probably more to it than just the power, and it's more than just the power, it's more than just the killing. I think it is about the person. Is it about the people who have been given power and how they choose to wield that power and accept those consequences? I think that's really kind of what a slayer is. So I think a slayer is different depending on who the slayer is.
Right. And, in the three primary examples that we have, which is Buffy, Kendra, and Faith, they all experience their becoming the Slayer in very different ways because Kendra was taken away from her family when she was very little and raised by her watcher and trained in the council teachings. But at the same time, it's a big deal to her family and her village or the people that she comes from. Whereas well, we assume with Faith, because we're never certain, but we definitely know with Buffy that she had no idea. The council never found her when she was a potential. I think you kind of are supposed to make that assumption with Faith as well. And so their upbringing outside of the council plays a massive role in who they are as slayers and their what they have gone through. So, there's very much elements of nurture versus nature in who they are and how they perform as a slayer.
Which is really interesting because I wonder too if all of that training, all of that sort of like learned by the book stuff that Kendra got is the thing that got her killed versus Buffy and Faith, who weren't trained in the traditions of the council and kind of found their own way and have been scrappy enough to survive for as long as they have.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, it's a little hard to tell because of the way Kendra dies. I mean, she encounters someone with Thrall, which technically so did Buffy the first time she died.
Sure, yeah. There's a little thrall there.
Right.
Not as much as with Dracula, but
Correct. That too. Right. But yeah, I definitely think that probably plays into Kendra's death. Yeah, it's just hard to say.
yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I wonder if it weren't for the hypnosis thing, would she have bested Drusilla? Had it
Right.
been anybody else? Had it been any other vampire? Could
Yeah.
she have bested her? That's kind of a question that just popped into my head at the moment. So when we're talking about like who are these people from the beginning, like who was Buffy? Like who is Buffy when we meet her? When we first see Buffy, with or without the movie, we start off with Buffy as being a very reluctant slayer, right? She's been
Hmm.
called to power. She's slain vampires, but she just doesn't want to do it anymore. Like she's very reluctant and she doesn't want to hold on to the power versus someone like Faith and even Kendra, I would imagine, who when they were called were like, yes, I've got this power now, and now I get to use it. I think for Kendra, it was probably a very great honor that she got this power, that she was indeed chosen, and now she gets to fight the forces of darkness. Where I think, at least for me, in my headcanon, is that when Faith found out, it feels very much akin to the young girl at the end of the series. You can tell she's in like an abusive home, and the punch comes and she stops it and she stands up. I feel like Faith finally got a moment to be like, I am now in control of my life. I have power over my life, because it seems like Faith's life was very chaotic and she didn't have a lot of stability or a lot of control of the things in her life.
Yeah, I would agree. That's a really good point. And actually, there's a really good compare and contrast with where Buffy and Faith were at the time they were called. Whereas Buffy's life was falling apart because of what was going on with her parents. And then obviously what ends up happening with she loses her first watcher, parents divorce, and move to Sunnydale. She's trying to start over. And so things probably feel more out of control than they had ever before in her life. Whereas, like you said, with Faith, Faith's life was kind of always out of control because she had an alcoholic mother and we assume an absentee father. And then she gets this power and also this person in her life, her watcher, who's really there for her, giving her guidance and structure, probably for potentially the first time in her life. So for her, it brings like a sense of purpose and positive relationship. Whereas for Buffy, it just brings on more pain, more chaos, more feeling like her life is out of control.
And also too with Faith, again, like with Kendra, everyone knew what was going on, so it was
Right.
fine. With Faith, she probably was like, deuces, I'm out of here, mom. And mom either didn't care, or, it just like there wasn't that connection to hold her down
Yeah.
to family, where Buffy has this mother who really does care and love for her and is overprotective to the point of a detriment to Buffy, where she has to like sneak out of the house, where she has to hide her identity. And the council is asking her to lie to her family to keep up this pretense. And so I would be confused as a Slayer to be like, is
Yeah.
this okay to do? Why are we doing this? And it goes back to like the control of the council, like we were talking in the past episode, to be like, you must keep this a secret from your mother.
Yeah.
But then over here you learn that that doesn't always have to be the case.
Right. Well, and Kendra was raised in that particular way from basically the time that she could remember. So, such a different experience, such a different mentality. And she was raised and trained in that council thinking and that, Slayers don't get emotional. That like she was raised with the thinking of being a tool, of being a weapon that the Watchers Council just used until she was killed. What we talked about, like you said in the previous episode, Kendra was like originally the perfect example of that until she meets Buffy and she sees another way.
Right, yeah. So each one of them have been called, and I think, and we've talked about like sort of the timeline of people being called, and we're
Right.
not really sure. And we think Buffy has been a Slayer for maybe like 6 months to a year-ish, six to
She was
eight months, maybe somewhere
Yeah,
in
I mean, she
there.
was definitely called in 96 because in the Becoming flashback, it specifically says that when
Right,
Angel sees her for the first time. So the question is when in 96? So she's
right.
definitely 15.
We're thinking it probably is sort of later in the year, because she burns down the gym, which is a reference to the movie, which that movie was the spring fling or
Right,
whatever. So we're
right,
assuming sometime in the spring of 96 she's called.
right,
And now when we meet her in Buffy, it's probably like what, January.
right,
It's just turned 97, so maybe it's like January or February, somewhere in that realm.
right.
So we're looking at somewhere between 6 to 8 months of her being
Yeah,
called. She is killed by the Master for a moment. She's dead for a minute.
right. In the spring of 97.
And
So
the spring,
late
yeah.
spring 97.
So that's when Faith is called.
No,
Or
Kendra.
Kendra is called, sorry. When Kendra is called. Kendra comes again in the middle of the year, again, kind of almost a year when we first meet Buffy on screen, almost,
Right.
maybe ish.
Yeah, actually, when you think about it, I mean, Kendra's probably only been also Slayer for like 6 months when we meet her.
Yeah. And I would think the
Um,
same for Faith as well. I think Faith is only like a Slayer for a few months
yeah,
when we
even
first
less
meet,
actually, I think.
because we meet Faith in the very beginning of season 3. And
Right.
Kendra dies at the end of season two. So like
Yeah.
we're so holding that. So it's only been like 3 or 4 months
Right.
for Faith of doing this. So they've all been called in all this time. But when do you think they became the Slayer?
Yeah, that's a cool question. I mean, I think for Buffy it was a real journey. I don't think there's any like single moment where it's like, oh, she really fully kicks in as a Slayer and absorbs it. I mean, I think her first major turning point is when she has to kill Angel. And actually, having just rewatched that episode, I was really struck by how momentous of a decision that was and the strength character it took to do that, especially at her age and what she had gone through and how she felt about Angel. It's pretty remarkable. I mean, I know it's expected of her and trained to do, but we also know that like just because it's expected of you or you've been trained for something like it. She wasn't trained to take out someone she had loved and she had slept with for the first time. He was her first lover. I mean, that's a big deal. So that's a huge turning point in her journey to becoming a Slayer. But I would say I don't think she fully embraces being a Slayer until season 5. I think when she actively chooses to go into training and learn more and be better
Mm,
because of what happened in Restless, I think that's really when she fully doesn't have this conflict as much anymore, wanting to be a normal girl, not wanting to be a slayer. Like
hmm
she's been at it too long and she's been through too much. And she also knows now what it's like to not be the slayer thanks to the helpless episode. I think that's another big turning point for her because she knows what it's like to be without her power and she's been at this too long and she knows too much. I mean, granted, she obviously has people in her lives who don't have physical strength that still fight and had been a permanent situation. I could see her still doing that. But since she does know what that's like, I think that was a real wake up call for her as well. How about
mm.
you?
So I think that there is a moment in Prophecy Girl where I think when she is killed by the Master and then comes back, I think that there is something in her that sort of awakens. That she's like, I think she sees something, she feels something that's a little bit more. And I think that's sort of her first like pebble to becoming the Slayer. I agree with you that I think her killing Angel and making that sacrifice and doing that, I think that's when she fully understands. Because when Angel gives that whole speech, she's like, take away your friends, take away
Hmm.
when you strip everything away that you have, including me, what's left? And she's like, it's me, boom, send you to hell. Like, I think in that moment, she realizes that this is what it means to be a slayer. I am alone. I do have to make these decisions, and I have to make the tough calls that no one else has to make. No one else is going to be asked to make, and no one else has to follow through. Because at the end of the day, even if something were to happen to Giles or Willow or something, again, like we say with when we see with Anya, when she becomes a vengeance demon again, like even then, Xander's like, there's got to be like we can't do it, and she was like, listen, Xander, you don't have to go out and kill your ex-fiance. I get that it's hard for you, but you're not the one that has to do it. If it were your sacred duty to do that, then maybe I would feel a little bit differently about it, but you don't. The buck stops with me. I have to stop her. And if you could figure out another way, that would be great. Let me know, because I will take that way out because it's what I wanted to do with Angel and didn't have the opportunity to do. This is how it has to be. This is how it's always going to be. And in point of fact, this is how it's always been. And all of our time together, this is how it's always been. And you've never once complained about it. When it was my lover that I had to send,
Yeah.
you were like, go kick his ass. When it's yours, you're like, wait, hold on, let's think about this.
Yeah.
That for her, that's like a true like turning point. I
Hmm.
also think the adjoining spell, that was step one. I think the adjoining spell was like step two, feeling the power of every slayer that was and ever will be from the first to the last, and harnessing that power, I think really sort of like woke her up and like you said was like, I need to know more about this. There's so
Right.
much that I don't know about what's going on. By the time we get to season seven, then it really does become a thing of like, I know what it means for me to be a slayer.
Right.
right? I know what it means. Now I need to figure out what it means for all of you. And I think that's a
Yeah.
huge, like, that changes her perspective because she's like, and this is how I have been doing it. This is how I've survived this long. So if you want to live, follow me. Then you also have to take into consideration, which is where the conflict comes in, is that what works for Buffy may not work for everybody else. And so understanding how to navigate people's past histories, their trauma, all of those things, and kind of giving them the basics, but then also treating them like individuals is an important part to creating a successful Slayer.
Yeah, and that thing that Buffy didn't have in season 7 was the time to do that with the
Right.
potentials. I mean, it was just like, we got to get you trained because we have this big bad coming after all of us, and you're just gonna have to trust me because I've got 8 years of experience under my belt, including her time in LA before Sunnydale. So it really is epitomized in Lies My Parents Told Me
Mhm.
when Spike makes Wood realize that as much as his mother loved him, the mission came first. And
Yeah.
that's true for Buffy.
hmm Yeah, like I don't have time. I mean, the end of the world is coming. I really
Right.
don't have time to be like,
Right.
tell me about your story, Kennedy. Like, I want to
Yeah.
know all about you. Like, braid, and she says, I don't have time to like braid their hair,
Right.
Granted, Faith is like, learn their names, yes. At,
Yeah.
at least know who you're yelling at.
Yeah. 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 I mean, Buffy definitely did her cut herself off thing during season 7, which also is not necessarily the right thing to do. But yeah, for sure. She didn't know she could do that, even if she didn't
Right.
have time to be like, learn everyone's story in detail.
Right. She could have been like, okay, you, or given them nicknames. She could have been like, you, England, let's go, or something like that. I don't know.
That would have been very Spike of her.
I don't have time to learn your names, but I'm gonna create a shorthand for you, just so we can get out.
I would have just made everyone wear name tags until I realized who they were. I'd be like, I'm sorry. Hello, my name is would have been every day. Wear a name tag, wear a name tag.
It would
Or
have
get
been
like
helpful.
laminated badges on your neck.
I'm, I'm a Slayer. Ask me how.
Yeah.
The potentials have like a whole bunch of flair on them.
Yeah.
Like by the end, like the longer you're there, the more buttons and pins you have.
How very Jennifer Aniston in Office Space.
You're like, I need more flair.
Instead of I'm a Slayer, ask me how it'd be like, I'm a potential. Do you think I'm next?
Right? Am I next? Who's next?
Okay, so Kendra, we only have Kendra for like 2 episodes based on the little that we know about her. I mean, I think for Kendra, obviously her showing up and meeting Buffy is one of the major turning points in her life because her life had been so planned out for her by being raised by her watcher and taking away from her family, as we've said. So, I think Buffy really shows her that there can be more to slaying, that there's another way to do it. Not everything the council teaches is correct or the only way.
Here's the thing. This might be a hot take.
Okay.
This might be a
Is
hot
this going to
take.
be a real hot take?
It could be. It could be. I don't know. It could be. I don't think Kendra was ever a Slayer.
Interesting. Okay, it
Not
is a hot take, but I'm intrigued and I'm
so. Was Kendra called to be a Slayer? Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. Did she have the power and the strength of the Slayer? Yes, absolutely. Was she trained by a Watcher? Yes, absolutely. So by definition, yes, she is quote unquote a Slayer. But I don't think Kendra had time to really understand what it truly meant to be a Slayer and how she could be a Slayer and how she could like take the power that she was given and wield it in a way that was her own,
Mhm.
as opposed to just following all the rules. Going A, B, C, and D because, oh, I get information. I need to go back to my watcher and tell him, and then he will tell me what to do next. So I don't think Kendra ever really doesn't live long enough to become her own Slayer.
Because honestly, once Buffy was like they thought she was dead that first time, why wouldn't they have sent her to Sunnydale? Because
Sunnydale.
Sunnydale still needed a Slayer. Yeah, I know. The
Right.
whole
It's
thing is
it's
like,
weird. Yeah,
yeah,
there's some holes in all of it because it's like,
right.
oh, and also to that point, when Buffy died and Kendra was activated, but then Buffy was like resurrected like literally 2 minutes later and
Right.
finish her battle with the Master, which Giles would have like reported to the council on. Wouldn't Mr. Zabutu be like, "Hey, my Slayer got activated," and so that they would have been like, "Hey, guess what? We have two Slayers now."
Yes. 100%. Yes. That's another point.
But again, like Buffy says, the good guy is not really good on communication. Like they,
Yeah.
which is a catch-all for this is why all the plot holes happen.
Yeah. Their logic is not our logic.
Right. It
But
really
yeah, no,
isn't.
I think that's a really fair point that Kendra is a Slayer for such a short period. And again, we can only guess, as we just speculated. We don't really know where she is doing her work or fulfilling her mission. So, she's not necessarily being challenged the way Buffy is on a nightly basis
Mhm.
because she's not necessarily based on a Hellmouth. And that adds to Buffy's experience. That even adds to Faith's experience when she
Mhm.
ends up in Sunnydale. It's a whole different thing than, patrolling a small city or even an active city, but one that doesn't necessarily have a Hellmouth. I mean, like LA is a great comparison. So obviously, LA has a huge supernatural community and elements, but there are also elements where, like, there are demons that are living peaceably or they're half human half demon, and there's inner relationships and inner marriages between, I guess, species. That's the correct word. And you don't really seem to have that in Sunnydale, probably the assumption being the Hellmouth and the power and the darkness of the Hellmouth changes that. And so she's, yeah, not necessarily getting the experience that Buffy is getting on a nightly basis by being based on a Hellmouth and such a powerful Hellmouth.
Yeah. And then when Faith was called, she was called like she was grew up in
Boston.
Boston.
Yeah.
So she was probably there
Right.
doing that. And I'm sure there's a ton of demonic activity
Oh,
happening
yeah.
in Boston.
Yeah.
Kind of probably similar to an LA sort of situation
Correct.
where you're
That's
like
what I
in
would
a
assume.
major city, you're like dealing with all these things. But then she talks about wrestling the alligator.
That's right. I forgot about that story.
And so, like, that's not going to be in Boston. So then at some point, she was like, so again, like, other Slayers seem to move around to different locations. So they travel to where the danger is, as opposed to Buffy, who is like landlocked to like, she is like
Right.
chained to the Hellmouth. She is the last line of defense between the world ending and the mouth of hell,
Right.
or one of the mouths of hell. Which again, yeah, that changes your experience. It changes how you do things. It changes your viewpoint, and I think you level up a little bit faster having to do that because she's out there every night. I'm sure Faith had like got to take some nights off because it was like I can't cover the entire city of
Right.
Boston and save everyone. I can only
Yeah.
go to like where the big dangers are, where
Right.
Buffy is constantly like trying to get every little thing that comes out.
Well, and then the other thing that Kendra and Faith don't have is an annual apocalypse.
That's true.
They're not fighting the big bad and taking them down and the challenge of that and coming up with the plans and strategizing with the team. So they don't have that experience either.
Yeah,
Which I think you kind of see when Faith comes back in season 7. It's why it's a little easier for her to get to know the girls, to kind of hang out as one of them. She's like the cool aunt, whereas Buffy has to be the parent
yeah,
in that situation. And Faith rightly calls her out on that Buffy should have taken more time to get to know the girls, but at the same time, Faith doesn't have the same burden that Buffy does. And she hasn't been there all along, that whole season,
right,
having to train the girls, watch out for them, watch one of them take their own life.
right. Watch one
Um,
of them die,
right. Yeah,
you know,
exactly. Watch another one die.
as the leader. And again, yes, learn their names, but like also she's so busy like trying to figure out what's going. She was like, "Great, come on in. I'm trying to figure out what's going on."
But going back to Faith, we've talked about where Faith started off. She had a not great life
Hmm.
and I think found some stability, found obviously power and control in becoming a Slayer and having a watcher who seems like a good, from the way Faith talked about her, seemed like a good watcher. As we talked about, she, had not a not a great life at minimum. Maybe it was even worse than that. We just don't get much details. And then she found certainly power and stability and a purpose in life when she became a Slayer and seemed to have a good watcher based on the things she said about her first watcher, even though we never met her. That's where Faith starts. And then obviously the major turning point for her is accidentally killing the mayor.
Hmm.
And, she spirals out from there because she hasn't had the support she needed in her life. She's too afraid to turn, to Buffy, to Giles. And to be fair, they've only sort of welcomed her. So I
Yeah.
understand that. And she's so young. So her instinct is to just rely on herself and kind of fake her way through it and pretend like it doesn't matter. But to me, the point where then she becomes a Slayer is actually not even on Buffy, is on Angel, is when she turns herself in, when
Yeah.
she realizes she can't run anymore. She can't keep hurting people. And that I think Angel fighting for her and saying, I'm not going to kill you. I know what you want. I understand. I've been there and I'm not going to do it because you're worth fighting for. And she decides to own up to her actions and turns herself in, knowing that she is only in prison because of herself. Because she could, obviously, as we see in season 4 of Angel, she could very easily break out.
Right. She's got the tough life and all of that stuff. I sort of assume I make this, I mean, this feels like a wild assumption. Not a wild assumption. I mean, I'm making a conclusion, but I'm taking a tiny step, and their conclusions were that the way she talks about men, and she is around the same age as Buffy. So I would imagine that at a young age, she was very sexually active, that she was doing things maybe for places to stay, for whatever, because she was young, because she was hot, all of this other stuff, that people took advantage of her. She tells Spike, all men are like this thing and they only want one thing. It's naughty schoolgirls and guys with bullwhips and all this other stuff that she's talking about. Which is so crazy to me because I was like, when did you meet a guy with a bullwhip? You've been in prison like most of your adult life. And so then this happened when you were a kid. So I don't know. Maybe somewhere in the Angel time where she was on the run, maybe she like, I don't know. Anyway, I don't want to think about it too much. It's very uncomfortable. But there is something about that troubled childhood. She does all that. I agree. I think killing Alan, the deputy mayor, was like the turning point for her in terms of like losing control of herself and what that power is, and also then becoming evil. But I think becoming evil I think Faith becomes evil because she's trying to protect herself and she's trying to protect her sanity. It's easier to be like, I am an evil person than it is to look at yourself and say, I have done an evil thing. It is so much easier to do that. With all of that happening as we see her come out, I think her going to prison is a great step in the right direction, but I think
Mhm.
where Faith really becomes a slayer is when she does her mind walk with Angel. There's a point there where she gets to come in when Angelus is turned and they break her out of prison and she breaks out of prison and does all of that stuff with like Orpheus and all of that stuff. Like
Right.
I think like for me, that's a moment where Faith, again, she gets to come in, she gets to be the leader. She's in charge. She knows what she's doing. Everyone calm down. I've got this. I can take control of this. And she's doing it for like the right reasons. She's making hard choices for the right reasons. She's sacrificing herself for the right reasons. She's doing so she come I think that's the moment where she's coming into her own power and she's sort of really using that power for the greater good.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I would agree. That's the next turning point where she really becomes fully actualized as a Slayer and what it means to be a Slayer in a positive way.
We've seen how they've accepted the responsibility, but like what is the consequence of accepting that responsibility?
Yeah, I think it's just part of growing into that power, but I think it's also part of growing up because there are always, as you grow up, you do have to start to learn that there are consequences to actions. And, for the Slayer, it's just a greater breadth and depth of consequences. I mean, it's at such a much more massive level than just being a regular teenager, but, you can still do things and have actions that can have severe consequences. I mean, as a teenager, like doing something stupid while driving way too fast on a road way beyond the speed limit and taking a curve too quickly and having a car accident and or anything like that. We all know that as teenagers we do stupid stuff. Most teenagers do to some degree. And I think that's the same thing with the Slayers because they are all chosen when they're teenagers that they're still growing up. So they're just learning in general how to deal with growing up and responsibility. And it's just to another level. And I think the turning points again for particularly for Faith and Buffy, as we said, we don't have much to work with Kendra. So for Buffy, while there are little realizations along the way in season one and season two, the big one obviously is when she has to realize that she's going to have to kill Angel when he has opened Akatla. And then for Faith, it's again realizing she can't keep going the way she's going and turns herself in to face the consequences of her actions, in prison. So yeah, I mean, I think that's what it's about. And then I think for Buffy, particularly when she comes back after being pulled out of heaven, after she's resurrected, she's almost kind of starting again. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but she's dealing with so much mental health issues that like the burden is tenfold on her again. And I think sometimes because she doesn't have the right help in her life, she doesn't always take the right lessons from what's going on. And I think, again, she takes the burden on herself, which doesn't necessarily help her or anyone that she's trying to, help as a slayer. Like sometimes taking all that weight on just is so demoralizing, so paralyzing, which is what I think we see a lot in season six. And, she kind of does the fate thing. She decides that, like, she's in such a dark place that she might as well give into the darkness, which leads to her toxic relationship with Spike. That doesn't help either one of them. That's such an interesting journey of the show is really how Buffy and Faith stories kind of merge in that way that they
Mhm.
both hit those dark places, choose to go to the darkness because they're already there, and how they have to fight their way back out of that. And then again, what are the consequences from that or finding that place in their life where they have control over their life again, but in a way that's productive and positive.
As you were talking, it really sort of started to click with me, like that body swap, those two episodes where they switch bodies, really does kind of, I think, really changes their essences a little bit as
Hmm.
well, because I think, being in Buffy allowed Faith to find a little bit of humanity, to like
Yeah.
touch on humanity, to see what that was like. And I think Buffy also saw what it felt like to be, unloved, unwanted, and what that was. So I think it was a really good perspective. And I think the consequence, at least, of each of them accepting their power, think is the opposite of what you think it should be. Because I think where Buffy starts off connected to all these people, family and friends, and all of that stuff, the further she goes along, the more disconnected she becomes, the more she pushes everyone away. Whereas Faith is, she starts off pushing everyone away, but realizes that what she really needs is that connection to people. Granted, and again, in the comics, she doesn't really even want to be a Slayer anymore. Like
Yeah.
she's like, I don't want to do this anymore. There's so many other people out here. I'm not really built for this anymore. Now that I've suffered the consequences of going through all of this other stuff, you don't want me wielding this power. Not really. And so I think like, and I think that that's a very like incredible sort of arc to be like, I was given power that I'm actually not responsible enough to wield, and I should actually step down. And I think that that's real power, to being like, I have this and I shouldn't have it. And I shouldn't have it. There are other people who can do that. So I think it's really nice to see. Granted, she gets sucked into, more hijinks and tomfoolery because of Giles, but Buffy definitely becomes very separate from everybody, where she starts off very connected. She's an obtainathon, as it were. But then by the time that she's done, she is very closed off. She's very isolated. And I think
Hmm.
that is the consequence of her accepting her true calling as a
Hmm.
slayer. And maybe there's an inevitability about it, that the Slayer is always going to be alone, and she's just been fighting that the entire time.
Right. Yeah, except the show seems to say that that's not the case, between the chosen spell and that oftentimes in order to fully be successful, she needed her team around her. I think to me, it's a bigger consequence of not actually dealing with the issues that come up between everyone and not talking things through and letting things fester. And then I think also the fact that we say this all the time, but I think if Buffy had someone in a mental health or in a therapy way to talk to someone after the big hits that she takes, like having to kill Angel and,
Hmm.
her mom throwing her out of the house, and she probably wouldn't have done that. She not only has this big burden of like the mission, but all of that ends up coming with emotional consequences because she is engaged in life, because she does have people she loves. And, as we see in season 5, when she goes on the vision quest, she's told that she's full of love. So in
Hmm.
some ways, her ability to love, I think sometimes feels like a burden to her
Hmm.
in the
Yeah.
slaying because she feels so much. Her way of protecting herself is to cut herself off, but that is actually the wrong thing to do. I think it,
Right.
it doesn't seem to help her or lead to good things. But again, that's where I think having someone older in her life who she could talk to and could guide her in that way, or multiple someones, it didn't have to be just
Right.
one person, was a failure for her.
Why aren't the Watchers educated and versed in like psychology
Oh
and
my God, they
therapy? Like
100% should
they
be.
know everything else. Like why is this not on the list of
Yeah,
criteria for a Watcher? To be
yeah,
like not only like are you doing your training sessions, but we're also going to do like a weekly therapy session
yeah,
to talk about this and make that common practice from the beginning so that when the big things happen, it can be like, hey, so let's check in. What
yeah.
happened this week? How'd you feel about it?
Yeah, well, aside from the fact that like we didn't do shit like that back then,
That's true.
excuse me, aside from the fact that we didn't do stuff like that back then,
People still aren't doing it.
well, yeah, but at least we like know we should be and we talk about it more. I think in spite of that Buffy being a multi-genre show, I mean, I think the one thing that the show, and I think in particular Joss Whedon just kept going back to the well, for good or bad, is the tragedy of it all. It'll be interesting to see if it does come about the new series, if they lean into that or not. Because I feel like as we in our own conversations and things you read and just other fan conversations and other analysis on social media that I don't think people want that as much nowadays.
Yeah.
A lot of shows back then too, and I think it still happens for sure, becomes tragedy porn. And
Yeah.
it's not about serving the story or the characters. It's just about how much pain can we put them through. That's not a good representation of storytelling and full character development, particularly for female characters or LGBTQIA characters or, characters of color.
Yeah. And I think that like, there's a lot of ways to create conflict in story without traumatizing people all the
Yeah.
time for it because people can still have different like moral stances on
Yeah.
things and like and create conflicts there, or there can be ethical issues that come up in the stories and things like that, but it doesn't always have to be like, well, let's sexually assault you, let's
Yeah.
in these relationships, like there's so many ways that to do that. And a lot of times too, I think we as people tend to model ourselves after what we see on TV and things like that. So I think it's actually a really good idea that we start creating stories that allow us to see healthy modeled behavior so that we can be like, oh, this is exactly how I should handle this situation. We could get into a whole thing about media literacy, but that's a
Yeah.
whole other, that's a whole other ball of wax. But I think it is helpful for people to like see healthy modeled behavior and realize that life isn't all just porn tragedy,
Right.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed.
and creating weird situations for yourselves that you don't need to be in because you refuse to communicate
Yes.
like vital important information about how you're feeling or setting healthy boundaries and all of that stuff, and then
Right.
all of these hijinks ensue and it's like, well, that's what we've seen on TV and that's what life is supposed to look like, and it's like, actually it's not.
Yeah.
Life shouldn't be nearly this difficult. So,
Exactly.
yes. Any final thoughts on the power of the Slayer? Who's wielding it?
We've seen a variety of slayers. two that we know the best being Buffy and Faith. And I think in spite of everything, and while there's probably exceptions to the rule, I do think most of the Slayers who get chosen have some sort of innate goodness in them and an innate sense of understanding the mission. And it's kind of all the other things that might throw them off, you know. So if Faith had been raised in a different way, I don't think she would have gone off the rails the way she did. I don't think that was innate to who Faith was. I think it was situational. So again, it kind of is like a nature versus nurture. And I think the nature of almost all the Slayers, there's a core sense of goodness and fulfilling the mission.
Mhm.
And it's, you know, how they're nurtured and what happens in their lives and that can throw that out of balance and also can make them better or worse slayers. We've said time and time again who Buffy is what makes her the great slayer that she can strategize, that she is willing to work with allies or even enemies as allies in order to get the job done. And that's what makes her such a great slayer and such a successful slayer, you know, in spite of two deaths.
I mean, yeah, how successful are you when you die twice? I don't know.
But yeah, it's sort of the world that's built around them too. But I mean, that's a big burden to put on one person and one person who's still trying to figure out who they are. I mean, you know,
Mhm.
that's true of all of us, but I think you can handle it better at 35 than you can at 15.
Sure.
So I think they kind of do amazingly well, actually,
You know,
considering all they have to go through and the burden placed on them.
well, it's funny when you say this, and again, I thought about this earlier, and I just like this idea that Faith did such a good job as a Slayer, or Faith was doing well, relatively well as a Slayer when she had a female watcher. And I think that that's because Faith was looking for a mother figure in her
Yeah,
life. And so I think that really worked. And I think that was starting, that relationship could have really been like a healing journey for her. The same way that I think Buffy having Giles fulfilled that need that Buffy needed for a father figure in her life. And it started that healing journey for her. And so I think, again, going back to the council, like the council pairing, really understanding who these young women are so that they can pair the right watcher with the
hmm
right slayer,
yeah,
as opposed to be like, it's your turn. Or they're
right.
in your area. The one in your area was called, and so
Yeah,
you automatically get it. Or like even sending Wesley in, like Wesley was not the right fit for that
yeah,
at all. And it's very clear by how Faith responded to him. He is a quote unquote weak, bumbling man. Faith has no time for that. We know that. So
right.
she's not going to listen to that. Buffy doesn't suffer fools. So she's still like, I can't with you. There's someone here who is way smarter than you. I'm smarter than you, Wesley. Like, I'm not listening to you right now. So I think like you can't just say like it's not one watcher fits all. So I think that's the other sort of thing that kind of gets screwed up with the Slayers and sort of how they use their power because I think you do have to send someone in who can help heal them emotionally, not only from like their previous life, but help them transition from this previous life that you had into this new thing. And there needs to be someone that, that can help guide you through that emotionally, not just through the physical stuff and the book stuff. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So we need the council to have some psychology training and therapists
Hmm.
on the payroll, and that they need to do a better job of how they match their slayer to their watcher.
Yes, agreed.
Sounds good. Well, we hope you enjoyed this conversation and we'd love to know what you think. So if you want to shoot us a question or your thoughts, you can email us at abuffypodcast@gmail.com and you can find us on all social media at a Buffy Podcast. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.